Chapter-by-chapter summary. Here is a brief chapter-by-chapter summary of The Catcher in the Rye, with key highlights. Chapter 1. The narrator, Holden Caulfield, begins his story at Pensy Preparatory Academy, an exclusive boarding school in Hagerstown, Pennsylvania, on the Saturday afternoon of a football game with a rival school. He is not at the game, which he finds disappointing, but looking in from the outside. Chapter 2. Holden visits with Mr. Spencer, his history teacher, who is aware that Holden is not coming back to Pensy after Christmas break because he's been expelled for failing 4 out of 5 classes. Chapter 3. Back at his dorm, Holden describes his neighbors, including Robert Ackley, an irritating student who invades Holden's personal space. Chapter 4. Holden visits his social climbing dorm neighbor, Ward Stradlater, who asks Holden to write an essay for him. Holden agrees, and Stradlater leaves for a date with Jane Gallagher, a girl from Holden's past. Chapter 5. Holden writes the essay about his late brother Allie's baseball mitt, which Allie had covered in poems so he would have something to read while in the field. Chapter 6. When Stradlater returns, he complains about the essay and they end up fighting. Holden is left beaten. Chapter 7. After the fight, Holden decides to leave Pensy immediately and catch a train to New York City. Chapter 8. Holden strikes up a conversation with Mrs. Morrow, a passenger on the train and a mother of a boy from Pensy. He tells her elaborate lies about her son. Chapter 9. In New York, Holden checks into the Edmont Hotel and encounters several people who seem phony to him. Chapter 10. Holden heads to the Lavender Room, a nightclub in the hotel, where he attempts to order alcoholic drinks and flirts with 3 older women. Chapter 11. Holden reminisces about Jane Gallagher, a girl he knew and liked, expressing deep respect for her. Chapter 12. Holden catches a cab to Ernie's Jazz Club, asking the cab driver about the ducks in Central Park along the way, revealing his anxieties about change and disappearance. Chapter 13. After leaving the club, Holden walks back to the hotel and encounters Sunny, a young prostitute. However, he ends up only wanting to talk with her. Chapter 14. After Sunny leaves, Holden reflects on his feelings about religion and prays for the first time in a while. Chapter 15. Holden arranges a meeting with Sally Hayes, a girl he's dated in the past, and tries to connect with his family's former maid. Chapter 16. Holden spends the day wandering around the city, ending up at the Museum of Natural History, a place he visited often as a child. Chapter 17. Holden meets Sally for their date. They argue when he suggests they run away together, which ends their date. Chapter 18. Holden goes to see a movie and thinks more about the war and his brother D.B.'s time in the army. Chapter 19. Holden meets up with an old acquaintance, Carl Luce, for drinks, but their meeting ends poorly when Luce leaves due to Holden's immature behavior. Chapter 20. Holden gets drunk and makes a late-night phone call to Sally, which doesn't go well. Chapter 21. Afterward, Holden sneaks into his parents' apartment to see his younger sister, Phoebe, who is very happy to see him. Chapter 22. Holden reveals to Phoebe that he wants to be the Catcher in the Rye, a person who prevents children from falling off a cliff into adulthood, thereby losing their innocence. Chapter 23. Holden enjoys his time with Phoebe, and they dance to a record. Their parents arrive, forcing Holden to sneak out. Chapter 24. Holden visits his former English teacher, Mr. Antolini, seeking guidance. However, he is confused and somewhat disturbed when he wakes up to find Mr. Antolini patting his head in the middle of the night. Chapter 25. Feeling anxious and disturbed, Holden wanders around the city, even contemplating hitchhiking out west. He eventually decides to spend some time with Phoebe at the zoo and watch her ride the carousel. Chapter 26. The novel ends with Holden in a mental institution or rest home. He reflects on his story, expressing a desire to go home and a newfound appreciation for his past, despite his evident struggles with it. He misses all the characters in his story, even the ones he dislikes. Throughout the novel, J.D. Salinger uses Holden Caulfield's narration to offer a deeply personal, reflective, and intimate exploration of a teenager's life, revealing his struggles, vulnerabilities, and his quest to find meaning and authenticity in a world he perceives as full of phonies.